Hey gang, good morning. It is time for our next session, the stuff about money they don't teach in school. And today we are I went back to the slides because I was trying to use Jamboard, which is fun to draw, but this one is probably a little bit easier to use slides. And we're going to talk today about building a budget. This is one of those deals that folks we don't we touch on it sometimes in school. I think you think it was obvious, and yet for many people it is not. So we're going to go through categorically some of the things that you should pay attention to when developing a budget. Okay. The first thing we're going to do is just get into the concept of what is it. We're going to talk about zero-based budgeting. This is not budgeting for companies. This is budgeting for individuals. So it is a you kind of deal, right? Hey, what do I need to put into my budget? And a zero-based budget is really simple. What you do is you take how much money you make, and then you divide it up into the categories, and then you can't spend more than that, right? So if you spend all the money and you run out, you have to change the budget. Okay, this is not one of these like the federal government where, oh, we don't have enough money, we'll just print more. We can't do that as individuals. So we assume that when we run out of money, we're done buying stuff. So there's going to be a prioritization, and there's going to be categories that we can use to determine how much we spend. So it's shocking to me how many people don't go through this process. I think it's extremely important that we learn the basics of this. In fact, in my professional opinion, everybody should at some point have a formalized budget where you know categorically this is how much I spend in different areas, right? I spend this much on my housing, I spend this much on my car, I spend this much on food, this much on clothing, this much on entertainment, and so forth. And so we're going to talk about how those break down, and then I'm going to talk about some categories about how much is the most that people recommend you spend. And the recommendations are really broad. Okay, I'm going to talk about two types of recommendations today. I'm going to talk about what I think the most famous one is right now, which is the Dave Ramsey group. Dave Ramsey has budget recommendations, and we can talk about that a little bit today. And then there's also the College of Financial Planning, and there's a financial planners recommendation. And the categories are different because the financial planning groups are comfortable with a certain amount of debt on your balance sheet. Dave Ramsey is a no debt guy. And I'm not going to tell you which one's right or wrong, but I will tell you one of them is more fail-safe than the other. And the reason that Dave Ramsey can get away with coming online and saying, he gets on the radio and says things like, hey, if you do this, it'll work, is because it does. If you spend less than you make and you have no debt, it works. Like mathematically, it doesn't fail ever because, well, you didn't spend it all. And you didn't owe it to anybody else, so they couldn't take it. So we need to know more about budgeting. Let's break into this stuff a little bit. What are the major budget categories? It's funny because folks will often think really big picture, or they'll think too small. They'll be like, well, there's my car, there's my house, there's my food, there's my this, there's my that. Big picture, right? And there's really three categories we talk about. There's living expenses. These are the necessities, right? You really can't get along without them. Then there's going to be lifestyle expenses, and those are the things that there's some flexibility to. And then there's going to be future, all right? So what are we putting into savings, retirement, and so forth. But I'm also going to challenge you guys. Before you can get into any real budget that's going to function, there's something that everybody needs to do, and it's a step one event. And the step one is that it needs to be part of your budget until this is handled, and it is to create an emergency fund. Perhaps one of the most overlooked of all steps in financial planning, the least popular probably because it's money that sits there, does nothing, and you want to use it, right? Well, the reason that we have an emergency fund is multifaceted. One of them is your income is not necessarily guaranteed. You could get sick, you could get hurt, you could have a job and lose the job, and so you need enough money to exist until your next income opportunity shows up. So that's what the emergency fund is for, is it buys you time so that you can get to earning an income again. If you have no income and you're spending everything you make every time, then if there's any interruption to your income, you are in trouble. So that is step one. If you've heard the term living paycheck to paycheck, it means you spend your whole paycheck every time. Well, it may be fun in the moment, but I will tell you that this is a poverty mentality. I realize that term is an insulting term to many people. And if all you have, I mean, if you spend it all because you feel like I have to, well, it's a trap. Okay, it's a trap because if you spend all the money, I've heard this happen before. Folks will say, well, I have money now. I better spend it because if I don't, I'm going to lose it. Right? It'll all be gone, so I better spend it now. If you think about that, it seems intuitive. Like it should be obvious that it doesn't work that way. If I spend all the money, then for sure I won't have it. And yet, many people think that way. And so we need to be aware that the first step is you got to put some aside. So any budget should initially involve funding an emergency fund. And then once you have that established, then you can move forward into operating the budget a little different. So let's look at step 2. We got to figure out the categories, right? So we talked about there's living expenses, which are mandatories. There are lifestyle expenses, which are more flexible. And then there's the future expenses, which is that rainy day concept. So you got to add it all up. And there's a bunch of stuff to it. I think that by and large, these categories are really pretty good to look at, though. If you were to take your paycheck and after taxes, okay, so the taxes are going to get taken out of it. And then you take what's left. And you were divided up into percentages, what you see on screen here is really pretty good. You should spend about 25 to maybe 30% of your income on housing. Why? I mean, 30% if you're buying it, okay? 25% if you're renting it, because you're really just paying somebody else at that point. And I don't really tolerate the excuses real well about, well, you don't know where I live and you don't know how much I earn and that you just can't get a place for cheaper. Like, well, then you get roommates or you get something else to divvy up the cost. If you're spending a lot more than that on your housing or your transportation, then your budget's out of whack, right? It means that you don't have enough in the other categories to make life function properly. And so that really is an allocation of resources. We will call it, say, where do you choose to spend the money? And if you tell me you don't have a choice and you're gonna, you don't have enough to make it meet, then here's the great, I think it's a lie in our culture. You're not stuck somewhere. If you need to go somewhere else where the cost of living is more affordable, then look into that. You don't have to stay in the most expensive spot with the lowest income and never break out of that cycle. In fact, the people that do that are what perpetuates the cycle. Whole separate issue here, but if you're willing to show up and live in poverty so that everybody else's businesses work and you suffer, shame on them for taking advantage of you, but shame on you for being taken advantage of. Get out of that circumstance and improve yourself. We need to all own some of that. And that's part of a budget is, frankly, it's taking on personal responsibility. And if you're rolling your eyes watching this, great. I don't care. You got to do it. Right? That's how money works. You got to take responsibility. Here's the other one that I think people mess up all the time. I am okay with you going out, and if you have to get a car and buy it on payments, most people will say you should buy the car and just pay cash for it, especially that's the Dave Ramsey way. I don't disagree with Dave. Ideally, buying a car and just being done with it is great. If you have a car because it helps you get to your job makes you money, and you are financing a little bit of the car, I'll work with you on that, but the reality is that it should not gobble up a big portion of your budget. I see way too many young people that go out and they buy really expensive vehicles and they have car payments that are as high as their mortgage. You're messing it up. There's no reason to have a car payment be bigger than your house payment. You're doing it wrong. So there you go. I'll just flat out say it. You're doing it wrong if you do that. So about 15% of your money should go there. And then you can see the other categories on screen here. You've got savings. You're going to have a utility bill. And some of these you can back into, right? If I'm supposed to spend about 10% of my money on utilities, then you know that if your utilities are 25% of your income, they're really super high, or your income is really super low. So you got to fix that either way. And again, that can mean having roommates or other ways to divvy up your costs so that, relatively speaking, the amount that you're spending isn't so high, or you need to increase your income. And I say that like, oh, easy. I realize it's not easy, but these are all the steps that it takes to getting to being financially sound. Okay. So these are categories that I think everybody should take a look at. Notice one of them is very, very intentional. You need to save. I think this is a little on the light side. I would like to see 15% of your income go into savings. Okay. And so if you were to do 15% of your income into savings, then and you start early, like if you're under 30, you should be doing 15%. If you're over 30 and you haven't been saving at all, you're behind. 15% may not be enough. So there you go. And you can do more homework. There's other resources to look into how the budgeting works on that, or you have ways to reach us afterwards if you need help with this. All right, so next, needs and what are savings? And this is the categories I told you about, right? 50% go into the I need this to make life work. 30% is I would like this, and 20% is into the save for the future. And you can break it down. How much goes into my rent or my car, my insurance, gas, groceries, electricity, and utilities, right? If this is kind of a grown-up budget, but you've got maybe you've got kids in daycare. That's part of it, right? Maybe you have loans or credit cards that hey, you're just now figuring it out and you want to get your life on track and you don't want that credit card debt. Budget to get it paid off. Don't make minimum payments, you'll never get it paid off. Right? So you do these things with intention, build the budget out, make it happen. And here's the other trick to this one. If you need to make sure, if you have a tendency to spend more than you have, this is not my trick. This is a Dave Ramsey trick, but it works really, really well. And what it is use envelopes. And I mean actually use envelopes and get cash. It's crazy, but if you think about spending more than you make, one of the dangers of using a credit card is it's really easy to just swipe it. Right? And just, okay, swiped it. And if I didn't have the money, I borrowed a little bit and then I'll pay it back later. That is a dangerous mentality. Okay, I am not one of these guys that says credit cards are all evil. Okay, a credit card is perfectly fine if you realize that when you swipe it, it's the same thing as cash. And if you know at the end of every month, you better pay that thing off or you are paying somebody else for the privilege of borrowing their money. And when you do, it costs you more. So don't do it, ever. Right? Just don't do it. That's the easiest financial advice I can offer is credit cards. If you're buying things that are not assets, you are the collateral when you use a credit card. So how do you do it? Well, one thing is you can get actual cash and you can put it in an envelope for each budget category. Right? So if you know I need this much as my budget is for groceries, you put that much cash in an envelope, and when the cash is gone, guess what? You're done. Right? You're out of money. And so that's the trick. If you want to get cute about it, they have these kind of little accordion envelope things. You can get them at an office supply store. They've got multiple spots to them, and you can put the cash in each one. But remember, every time that you steal from one envelope to put into another, what are you doing? You're just robbing from yourself. Now, if at the end of the month you don't spend it all and you want to take that money and apply it to another category or put it in savings, great. But what it's going to do is it's going to make you very aware of what you spend. And that's ultimately what a budget is it's spending awareness. What I want you to know is how much money do I make and how much money do I spend? In truth, the categories, while suggestions, aren't what matters. What matters is you spend less than you make. If you have almost nothing in terms of car payment, then great, you can spend it somewhere else in your life. That's how this works, right? It's just being accountable to make sure that you don't spend more than you make. And here's the other thing. The more that you earn, the more flexible your budget categories get. If you think about it, if you earn $25,000 a year, you can only afford so much of a house. But if you earn $250,000, you could buy a lot more house. If you earned $1 million a year, do you really need to get a giant house? Or can you get the same house as everybody else and just have more money to spend in other places? I think you know the answer. So the important thing is be accountable to how you spend and do it on purpose. So that's what we do with budgets. That's why they exist, all right? Look, that's it for the day. I know this one's a little bit preachy, but nevertheless, lots of people overlook budgeting, and it is the first step to a financially successful journey in life is know what you're spending and know where you're spending it. All right, look, other questions or topics you'd like us to cover, go ahead and hit us up on email. You've got on screen here how you can reach us. And also don't forget, parents, we've got a bunch of resources for you as well. If you go to our webpage, You can find, there's free calculators. We do other podcasts. We have a radio show that we've got every week, and all of our podcasts for that are available. So please don't forget, if you're on YouTube, to like and subscribe and join our channel. We're going to continue to do these updates, even though we're nearing the end of this. We've got a few more days in March. I'm sorry, a few more days in April, and then we'll get to the end of the formal series on this one, and then we'll communicate with you. We'll ask you, what would you like us to see continue? And bottom line is, this was just we wanted to get our young folks a chance to get a better handle on their finances. So that's it for the day. Thank you guys, as always, for tuning in. Until next time, this has been David Littlejohn, and this has been the stuff about money they don't teach in school. Catch you later.